In episode 17 of Mushoku Tensei's second season, we finally get the anime adaptation of the Norn shut-in incident, perhaps the best point of view chapter in the original light novel. Now in my mind, the Mushoku Tensei anime has two extremes when it comes to the point of view chapters. Either it elevates the source material by using visuals, sounds, and music to enhance the emotions that are felt by a particular chapter, for instance the beautiful montage of Paul and Norn in the aftermath of the teleportation incident, or the point of view is left out entirely. Most notably, Sarah's point of view chapter, which was the emotional climax and payoff to the entirety of Volume 7, the exclusion of which left the anime adaptation of that volume with quite a flat ending. Now this brings us to today's anticipated episode, and boy are we lucky. It's not perfect, it didn't quite make me burst into an inconsolable mess like the original chapter, but boy oh boy did we get a great adaptation of Norn's perspective. To start, let's give our flowers. And the first of those is for Norn's voice actor, Saya Aizawa, who gave a perfect portrayal of the Norn that exists in my mind. For the majority of the episode, Norn's voice isn't quite sad or angry, but just plain soft. It's like Norn is constantly struggling to have herself be heard, and it's a fantastic acting decision. It perfectly captures the feeling that Norn is slipping away from the world while making it even more impactful when the brief bursts of anger or frustration slip out, with the best example being when she doesn't want to hear Luke's praise of Rudius. Now the rest of the flowers should be given to the episode's director, Yui Kanbei, and storyboarder Tomohiko Ito. There were a bunch of fantastic directing and storyboarding choices that made this stand out from a one-to-one adaptation of the light novel. Let's start with a few of the relatively minor details that didn't have to be included at all, but add texture to the world and bring the story to life. Seeing Norn's roommate Marissa stretching in the morning, seen via a cool shot from the outside of the window while it's raining. A cute insert shot of Ginger asleep next to Aisha while Norn and Ruijerd have their conversation to show that Ruijerd is guarding everyone at night, and the sun setting outside Rudy's old window to show how long his brother was by his side. And now we have some really cool choices that elevate the source material. The first is perhaps the best. Rudius knocks on Norn's door and receives no answer, so he cautiously goes to open it and is met with a loud male voice telling him to stay out. And moments later, when he opens the door and sees his past self slouching in front of his computer, we realize that the voice was his own. This is a fantastic audiovisual choice that can only be as effective as it was in an audiovisual medium like anime. We are caught off guard when we initially hear the voice. Perhaps Norn is in more trouble than we thought, and then we're hit with the crushing feeling that it may in fact be Rudius that is struggling with more than we thought, facing his own challenge of his past life in this situation. Then we have quite a subtle addition that, as far as I'm aware, wasn't mentioned in the light novel, which is the addition of a curtain in front of Norn's bed. Now this works on two levels. Firstly, it works as a representation of Norn's obscured vision of Rudius. Throughout her retelling of her perspective, she reiterates that she doesn't quite understand who her brother is. Her experience of fear and hatred toward him is so different than the way everyone else speaks of him. She never quite understands him, as though she sees him through a veil. And secondly, the curtain acts as a symbolic barrier between Norn and Rudy that is lifted when Rudy reaches out to her and Norn changes her perspective on him. There's also some really cool show-don't-tell inclusions. To emphasize Norn's disdain for comparisons to her brother, we have a close-up shot of her teacher's mouth as she says the words "your brother." Instead of having Norn describe Rudius's nervous expression, we see his clenched fist. Instead of Norn describing her nauseous mix of emotions, we get the motif of her grabbing her stomach. And instead of Norn telling us that she can't hate Rudius anymore because she now realizes he's too much like her father, we see a nervous-looking Paul as Norn pulls the curtain away, which transitions to a nervous-looking Rudius in a blink of Norn's eye. Choices like these, that compress many words into few visuals, make it so that the weight of the chapter can be conveyed in its measly 8 minutes of runtime. Now beyond these storyboarding and directing choices, there's also two miscellaneous things that I'd never really realized that add to my appreciation of the chapter. Firstly, I never really considered that this all takes place at night, and for some reason, that makes the Norn-Rudy scene even more emotional. I also love the idea that Norn has to keep repeating her name to everyone around her because people don't even remember it. All they know her as is Rudius's little sister. So now that I'm done praising the episode, let me just briefly talk about some areas where I think it fell slightly short. Firstly, I think the episode emphasized Norn's hate and inferiority toward Rudius pretty well, but not her fear. For example, in the original chapter, when Norn describes traveling with Ruja to Sharia, she mentions that she would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, trembling, thinking about how if she ever upset Rudius, he might hit her like he hit her dad. She also recounts the scene we saw last episode, where Rudy says he can buy Norn's entrance into the university, and Norn gets angry, which leads to a fight with Aisha. She tells us that Rudius's cold tone when he told them to stop fighting made her so afraid that he was going to hit her that she cried a little. I really feel like we never really felt this fear that Norn had toward Rudius in this episode. Additionally, the original chapter has a really cool motif that was completely cut from the episode, where Norn is constantly saddened and isolated by the fact that no one is on her side. There's a few references to this across the chapter. She mentions that though Sylvie is nice, she's not on her side. She mentions her roommate Marissa is nice, but even she isn't on her side. She even doubts if Rudyard would take her side if Rudius were to start hitting her, as he seemed happy to see Rudius again, and perhaps she would be deserving of it for being rude or selfish. I believe that this motif of no one being on her side really portrays that Norn doesn't feel like there is anyone around her that unconditionally loves her, and it really elevates the emotions of this scene, and it was sad to not quite see this get adapted. And finally, I feel as though the comparisons to Aisha were quite lacking. We never quite learn of Norn's grandmother comparing her to the illegitimate Aisha. We don't hear of Norn feeling ignored because Rudyard and Ginger would follow Aisha's plans when they were traveling, and we don't hear about Norn's relief that Aisha won't be attending school with her. Personally, I think it's very important to make it clear that Norn feels inferior to Aisha, if only for a scene that I won't spoil from Volume 12, where Norn shows great maturity and kindness toward her. So as Norn's #1 fan, those are some of my quick thoughts on this monumental Norn episode. I thought I may as well write something up before I look into the general public perception toward the episode, and before I have my talk with Kyle about the episode tomorrow. So if you're interested in more in-depth thoughts about this episode, go check out that discussion video on this channel. It should be up within 24 hours of this one.